This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine.
Hello, this is Breach Burke. Before we get into this week's podcast, I would like to thank my patrons personally: Politi, John H., Tanya T., Veronica S., Jeffrey B., Gabby, Helen M., Sunny H., Scott K., JRM, Susie G., Eldritch Priest, B. Lupita, C. Roberts, Jeanette, DS, Jake B., CDV, Ali, V! V, Mary Beth R., Ida B., Eric N., Tana, May, and Christine F. I really appreciate those of you who have joined recently and who have stuck with me over these years. Our community is small, and there's so much I would like to do in terms of providing courses, conversations on the dark feminine, and extra content, so please consider joining at patreon.com/Chthonia. Now on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm Breach Burke, and welcome to this first podcast of 2025. Now, the first subject that I'm going to cover this year is a Patreon request, and I'm going to be doing two in a row in the same vein, and this is going to be about Joan of Arc, or Jeanne D'Arc, as she is sometimes known in French. And weirdly with this one, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the story of Joan of Arc. Okay, we're going to look at her, the facts about her: when she's born, when she died, what she's known for, and trying to give an abbreviated version of that narrative, because there are very long versions, as I'm finding myself reading through these very long explanations of what she did. But just to give us the key points, the highlights of what she is known for, and then what she was actually canonized for as a saint. Now, I did do a series on Christian female saints last year, and I had done more of the mystical saints. Joan of Arc does fall into the category of a mystic to the extent that she has visions of saints, and that she hears the voices of saints, and of angels as well. And these tend to be very, very private things that she doesn't necessarily share too much about with people. But there are certain things that she does that makes her, that allows them to verify what they consider to be the truth of her claims, the veracity of her visions. And these are documents that are unfortunately lost to time. The only documents that we have on Joan of Arc historically, well, maybe not the only ones, but the main ones are the ones that remain from the Inquisition, and then, of course, perhaps any kind of follow-up work or documentation that the Church may have done in the wake of her canonization, beatification first, obviously, and then canonization, which wasn't really... her canonization was in, May 16th, 1920 is when she was canonized, okay? So this is... Now, given that Joan was born in 1412, this is... almost 500 years after the fact. Her beatification was in 1909. So yeah, we're literally talking almost 500 years later that she is declared a saint. And she is one of the co-patron saints of France because of her efforts to thwart the English during the 100 Years' War. This is what she's known for. Now, I think maybe I was starting to say this at the beginning, and like on many of these podcasts, which are quite informal if you're new to this podcast, even though I do take a very academic and evidence-based approach to a lot of things, we are looking at the psychology around this, the mythical psychology, and the symbolism that is brought up, and also the aspects relating to the feminine, or perhaps the dark feminine in particular, but these aspects of the feminine that relate to these female figures, or in the way in which these figures relate to our motifs and archetypes of the feminine in particular. And I don't know, now as I was preparing for this podcast and reading through various sites, various bits of material, I found it very, very upsetting. And now, mind you, I grew up Catholic. I'm very well aware of Joan of Arc. It's not like I've never heard of her before. Okay? And it's not the first time that I've heard her story, but for some reason, every time I read it, it just bothers me a lot. So, which is odd, which is not the reaction I really expected to get to this story. So there may be, like I said, I like to go over the history and the story and what we're looking at, and then looking at certain key points that I think are relevant to the subject of this podcast. But I may be doing a little more speculating and editorializing than usual. I mean, you can be the judge of that, I guess. But yeah, there's a little bit more here that there may be a little bit more that I bring in here, especially maybe towards the end, that is more about my feelings about this, maybe, and not necessarily supported by anything, but so they're going to be something that you can take or leave, really, in terms of evidence of anything. But when I look at this material, I'm finding myself. I always try to find the thread in it that makes sense to me as I'm reading these things, or how where the connections are, where I feel the connections between this story and perhaps other connected ones. And the main points I think we're going to look at here, there's a few questions that I'm going to want to answer. First of all, there's going to be the subject of Joan's visions, okay, and who came to visit her. What were her visions? We're going to look at what she was called to do and why. That's the big question. Why? Why is she called to do this? And then we want to look at the reason that she was condemned as a heretic. And spoiler alert, I'll tell you now, it's because, well, first of all, they called her visions infernal. Okay, they claimed that they were not really from God, even though an ecclesiastical authority had verified before she even went into battle that they were regarded to be visions from God, authentically, and they often came true. And also, okay, but the main charge was that she wore a man's clothes, okay, and that this was the reason that she went through. And of course, there's this whole political circus and hoopla, and that this is the reason that she ultimately ended up being put to death. And then, of course, later on, the church everybody had to go back and go, whoops, well, they shouldn't have put her to death because she didn't do anything wrong, and they had to retract all the terrible things they did at the Inquisition trial and say, oh, no, she really was this and she really was a saint. Well, yeah, that does a lot for her retrospectively, doesn't it? So, but that is, in fact, what happened. So let's get into the details of her story, and those are kind of the three main things that I want to look at there. I want to look at her visitations. I want to look at the heresy charge itself and what that was about and what that says. And then thirdly, about the question of why was she chosen for this mission. Okay. And again, that's going to be a largely speculative part because, if she's receiving holy visions, nobody has any clue. Like there's no, unless somebody else has a vision, and that doesn't tend to really count as evidence in the academic world. But I've just found myself having a lot of feelings about that one. So that one may be a little more, I may be waxing a little more poetic on that one, but we'll see. Okay, so let's see if we can't get down to some of the basic facts here. First of all, she was born in 1412. We don't have a birth date per se that we can see. We just know that she was born in 1412 in Domremy in the Duchy of Bar in the Kingdom of France, and that she died on the 30th of May, 1431, at the age of 19. And of course, she was put to death, and that was in Normandy. Okay. So her crowning achievement here, which we see, is that she was the defender of the French nation in the siege of Orleans, and her insistence on the coronation of Charles VII of France during the 100 Years' War. Claiming to be under divine guidance, she became a military leader who transcended gender roles and gained recognition as the savior of France. So she was born to a propertied peasant family at Domremy in northeast France. In 1428, she requested to be taken to Charles VII, later testifying she was guided by visions by the Archangel Michael, St. Margaret, now this is St. Margaret of Antioch, and St. Catherine. This is St. Catherine of Alexandria. Now, it's worth noting that both of these women who she had visions of were martyrs, early church martyrs. And they were women often They were either known for their beauty, or they came from royal families with a lot of education and were trying to convince the Emperor of Rome to cease persecuting the Christians. It's known that St. Margaret died during probably the Diocletian persecutions. So they were definitely from the era before Christianity was the official religion of the empire. So interestingly, Joan goes at the age of 13. Now, first time she is sent, and the Archangel tells her specifically who she needs to speak to. She was told by the Archangel Michael to go visit Robert de Baudricourt. But, and of course, when she was brought by her uncle to him to explain what she had been told, he basically was very rude to her and said, get the heck out of here, go home and give her a whipping kind of thing. So she was very crushed when she heard this, because she was getting very, very persistent angelic visions and voices telling her that she had to do this. And so how does a 13-year-old girl do you convince the French army that they need to take you on and make you a commander? Like, just think about how kind of ridiculous that is. We try to think about it. Now, of course, you have to also think about what would prompt Joan. I mean, if Joan was, if she was just being like a raving lunatic, for example, if she was seeing things and it wasn't, and they thought that this was just, her having fevers or visions or something like that, certainly her family would not have let her go. But we also have to look at the incredulity of anybody in the French army. Why would this person appear and do this? So let's back up. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So those are sort of the basic starting points. So it was said that she, I'm reading this actually from Catholic 365. I have a couple different encyclopedia entries that I'm going to there's Catholic Encyclopedia, the New Advent, which of course talks about her in one particular mode. Of course, Wikipedia has the facts in another mode. And this one I think is just interesting, because the reason I've picked this article is because this woman who wrote this article is asking all of the same questions that I'm asking. Okay, and that's why I found this one interesting. So they said that she was claimed to be a loving, trusting girl, and that they said her greatest mistake may have been in trusting people. But she had, she supposedly had a secret place where a statue of the Blessed Mother and the baby Jesus, and praying in her chapel. They said she was also very patriotic. So they said her years of joy were short-lived. At age 12, the voices began coming to her. They were always accompanied by a brilliant flash of light and came at the precise time the sexton rang the church bells. At first, there was only one voice. When this voice spoke to her the third time, she knew it was St. Michael the Archangel. This was affirmed on the third visit by an apparition. She's visited by an apparition she recognized as St. Michael in the company of other angels. At first, now this part, I don't know why I don't believe this, but this is supposedly what was said. That he gave her instructions on how to live a good Christian life, told her to be good, go to church often, and obey her parents. But of course, now this person points out that she was already practicing these virtues. I don't know why. This is me editorializing, because nobody actually knows. I get a kind of a big no on that. I don't think that's what St. Michael said to her, because it was known that Joan was very cagey about her visions and about what was said in them. She didn't seem to want to discuss them, even when she was in front of the Inquisition. At a given point, St. Michael advised her that she would be visited by St. Margaret of Antioch and St. Catherine of Alexandria. He told her she had to listen to their instructions and follow them to the letter. She agreed to do this. When they came, they were beautiful. They wore crowns on their heads. We get the impression that all she could see of them were from their heads down to their waist. Joan grew comfortable with her heavenly visitors, especially St. Michael, to whom she and much of the world of the Middle Ages had a great devotion. But a time was to come when the messages took on a different tone. She was shocked when she was told, "Daughter of God, you must leave your village and go to France." She replied, "But I'm only a young girl and I can't ride or fight." She was told to save France from the English. This was all beyond her. Think about it, though. Girl was a teenager. Granted, she was much more spiritual than most adults of her time, but she was being told things that most adults would have a major problem accepting. Given the same set of circumstances, I don't know anyone who wouldn't be completely bowled over by the proposition set before this young girl. And actually, it sounds like she was pretty bowled over by it herself. She knew the voices were sincere. She trusted especially in St. Michael. She said she knew he would not allow the evil one to deceive her, but she was also very confused. As the years progressed, the messages became more specific. She would save France from defeat at the hands of the British. This continued until she was 16. Her voices would give her no peace. Then one day in May, she was given a direct command. She was told by St. Michael to go to a Robert de Baudricourt in a neighboring town, tell him to provide her with troops, escort her to the Dauphin, who of course was Charles VII. His first reaction upon seeing this young peasant girl wearing her worn red dress, claiming she would save France and have the Dauphin crowned king, was to give her a swift boot. Okay, which is what she said. Her angelic voices would not leave her alone. She tried to explain that she'd only been able to accomplish humiliation at the hand of Robert de Baudricourt, but St. Michael would have none of it. Finally, he said, "It is God who commands it." Okay, now just keep that kind of in mind there. Fortified by the courage and determination of the angel, she set out at the beginning of the following year to see Robert de Baudricourt once again. However, by this time, the situation of the French was so disastrous, he was not anxious to dismiss her. He was ready to grab onto any hope. Finally, he gave in and assigned 3 men to bring her to the king. So this begins a whole series of events. And again, these people are reluctant to believe her. They end up bringing in, according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, a series of, theologians, scholars, clergy, church officials to question her and to try to determine the veracity of her visions. And then when certain things that she predicts, certain battles being lost and so forth, actually come to pass, then they're like, okay, maybe we'll take this girl seriously. So she was given a white suit of armor. The banner she carried had that of Jesus and Mary. Every battle she fought, the French won by a wide margin, and the English were pushed back. Let's see if I can go to the Catholic Encyclopedia on this one. So, she was admitted to the presence of Charles VII. To test her, the king had disguised himself, but she at once saluted him without hesitation amidst a group of attendants. From the beginning, a strong party at the court, La Trémois, the royal favorite, foremost among them, opposed her as a crazy visionary. But a secret sign communicated to her by her voices, which she made known to Charles, led the king, somewhat half-heartedly, to believe in her mission. What this sign was, Joan never revealed, but it's most commonly believed that this quote-unquote secret of the king was a doubt that Charles had conceived of the legitimacy of his birth, and Joan had been supernaturally authorized to set at rest. Still, before Joan could be employed in military operations, she was sent to Poitiers to be examined by a numerous committee of learned bishops and doctors. Not even sure if I'm saying that name right. The examination was of the most searching and formal character. It's regrettable in the extreme that the minutes of the proceedings, to which Joan frequently appealed later on at her Inquisition trial, have altogether perished. All that we know is that her ardent faith, simplicity, and honesty made a favorable impression. The theologians found nothing heretical in her claims to supernatural guidance, and without pronouncing the reality of her mission, they thought she might be safely employed and further tested. Returning to Chinon, Joan made her preparations. Instead of the sword the king offered her, she begged that the search be made for an ancient sword buried, as she averred, behind the altar in the chapel of St. Catherine de Febois. It was found in the very spot her voices indicated. There was made for her at the same time a standard bearing the words Jesus Maria, with a picture of God the Father and kneeling angels presenting a fleur de lis. But it says the most interesting fact connected with this early stage of her mission is a letter, Rotzler, written from Lyon on the 22nd of April, 1429, delivered at Brussels and duly registered, as the manuscript attests, before any of the events referred to received their fulfillment. The Maid, which is what she is also known as, La Pucelle, reports that she would save Orleans and would compel the English to raise a siege, that she herself in a battle before Orleans would be wounded by a shaft but would not die of it, and that the king in the course of the coming summer would be crowned at Reims, together with other things which the king keeps secret. And of course everything happened exactly as she said. And on the 17th of July, 1429, Charles VII was solemnly crowned, the Maid standing with her standard, for, as she explained, as she had shared it in the toil, it was just that it should share in the victory. So, okay, what happens then? She goes through all these battles. The English are repulsed. And of course, then they put a price on her head, but they can't touch her. She has all of these victories. And this is almost by the time you said, remember, she's going into this kind of service at the age of 16. But then after this, and after Charles is crowned king, there are some missions of hers that don't do so well. They fail. Now, it's worth noting at this point that this is the end of the period of time in which the archangels and the voices seem to be, at least according to the record that we have, compelling her to go further. There's a lot that says that maybe she continued by her own choice. Now, the Catholic Encyclopedia says, the principal aim of Joan's mission was thus attained, and some authorities assert that it was now her wish to return home, but she was detained with the army against her will. The evidence is to some extent conflicting, and it is probable that Joan herself did not always speak in the same tone. So yeah, how much of the account that is told is Joan's and how much of it is just created in her voice is not clear. Probably she saw clearly how much might have been done to bring about the speedy expulsion of the English from French soil, but on the other hand, she was constantly oppressed by the apathy of the king and his advisors, and by the suicidal policy, which snatched at every diplomatic bait thrown out by the Duke of Burgundy. So, Duke of Burgundy was aligned with the English, and so Charles VII, of course, then ends up, after all of this, making a pact or agreement with the Duke of Burgundy. Which of course is very demoralizing to Joan. So we'll just continue here in the Catholic Encyclopedia. The inactivity of the following winter, mostly spent amid the worldliness and jealousy of the court, must have been a miserable experience for Joan. It may have been with the idea of consoling her that Charles, on the 29th of December, 1429, ennobled the Maid and her family, who henceforth from the lilies on the coat of arms were known as the name of Duly. It was April before Joan was able to take the field again at the conclusion of the truce, and at Melun her voices made known to her that she would be taken prisoner before Midsummer Day. Neither was the fulfillment of this prediction long delayed. It seems that she had thrown herself into the compagnie, I'm saying the word for countryside, compagnie, on 24th of May at sunrise, to defend the town against the Burgundian attack. In the evening she resolved to attempt a sortie, but her troop of some 500 encountered a much superior force. Her followers were driven back and retired, desperately fighting. By some mistake or panic of Guillaume de Flavy, who commanded in Compiègne, the drawbridge was raised, while many of those who had made the sortie remained outside, Joan among them. She was pulled down from her horse and became the prisoner of a follower of John of Luxembourg. Guillaume de Flavy had been accused of deliberate treachery, but there seems no adequate reason to suppose this. Okay. So it says, no word, and this is the Catholic Encyclopedia, no words can adequately describe the disgraceful ingratitude and apathy of Charles and advisors in leaving the Maid to her fate. If military force had not availed, they had prisoners like the Earl of Suffolk in their hands, for whom she could have been exchanged. Joan was sold by John of Luxembourg to the English for a sum which would amount to several $100,000 in modern money. There can be no doubt that the English, partly because they feared their prisoner with a superstitious terror, partly because they were ashamed of the dread which she inspired, were determined at all costs to take her life. They could not put her to death for having beaten them, but they could get her sentenced as a witch and a heretic. So that and hence becomes the politics of Joan's trial. So they end up getting the Vicar of the Inquisition. It says they at first, upon some scruple of jurisdiction, refused to attend, but this difficulty was overcome before the trial ended. Cauchon's assessors, this is in Pierre Cauchon, the Bishop of Beauvais, who was an unscrupulous and ambitious man and part of the Burgundian party, so siding with the English, really, in this. And so his assessors consisted almost entirely of Frenchmen, for the most part theologians and doctors of the University of Paris. Preliminary meetings of the court took place in January, but it was only on the 21st of February, 1431, that Joan appeared for the first time before her judges. She was not allowed an advocate, no legal counsel, and though accused in an ecclesiastical court, she was throughout illegally confined in the castle of Rouen, a secular prison where she was guarded by dissolute English soldiers. Joan bitterly complained of this. She asked to be in the church prison where she would have had female attendants. It was undoubtedly for the better protection of her modesty under such conditions that she persisted in retaining her male attire. Before she had been handed over to the English, she had attempted to escape by throwing herself from the window of the Tower of Beaurevoir, an act of seeming presumption for which she was browbeaten by her judges. This also served as a pretext for the harshness shown regarding her confinement in Rouen, where she was first kept in an iron cage, chained by the neck, hands, and feet. On the other hand, she was allowed no spiritual privileges. She could not attend Mass on account of the charge of heresy and the monstrous dress that she was wearing. Now, there are some that suggest that, so she goes through this trial. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. And that she basically really flummoxed the inquisitors, who, when they asked her certain questions, expected that she was going to return certain answers. But the way that she answered all of the questions, they really had a hard time pinning anything like heresy on them. They pressed her regarding her visions, but upon many points she refused to answer. The attitude was fearless, and upon the 1st of March, Joan boldly announced that within 7 years' space, the English would have to forfeit a bigger prize than Orleans. In point of fact, Paris was lost to Henry VI on the 12th of November, 1437, 6 years and 8 months afterward. It was probably because the Maid's answers perceptibly won sympathizers for her in a large assembly that Cauchon decided to conduct the rest of the inquiry before a small committee of judges in the prison itself. We may remark that the only matter in which any charge of prevarication can be reasonably urged against Joan's replies occurs at this stage in the inquiry. She was pressed about the secret sign given to the king, declared that an angel brought him a golden crown, but on further questioning she seems to have grown confused and contradicted herself. Most authorities are agreed she was trying to guard the king's secret behind an allegory, with she herself being the angel, but others insinuate that the accuracy of the procès verbal cannot be trusted. On another point, she was prejudiced by her lack of education. They asked her to submit herself to the church militant. Joan clearly did not understand the phrase, though willing and anxious to appeal to the Pope, grew puzzled and confused. It was asserted later that her reluctance to pledge herself to a simple acceptance of the Church's decisions was due to some insidious advice treacherously imparted to work her ruin. The examinations terminated on the 17th of March, and of course they claimed 22 judges declared her visions to be false and diabolical, and they declared if she refused to retract, she would be handed over to the secular arm, which was the same as saying she was going to be burned at the stake. Certain formal admonitions, first private then public, were administered to the victim, but she still refused to make any submission which the judges considered satisfactory. On May 9th, she was threatened with torture, but held firm. Meanwhile, the 12 propositions were submitted to the University of Paris, which, being extravagantly English in sympathy, denounced the Maid in violent terms. They affirmed that she ought to be declared heretical and handed over to civil power if she still refused to retract. It says she remained. Next day, a stake was erected in the cemetery of Saint-Ouen. In the presence of a great crowd, she was solemnly admonished for the last time. After courageous protests against the preacher's insulting reflections on her king, Charles VII, the accessories of the scene seemed last to have worked on mind and body worn out. Her courage failed her. She consented to sign some sort of retraction, but the precise terms were never known. It is in the official record, the process of a form of retraction inserted. That doesn't make any sense. Inserted, which is most humiliating in every particular. It is a long document which would have taken a half an hour to read. It was read aloud to Joan and was signed must have been something quite different. For 5 witnesses, the official read it aloud declared that it was only a matter of a few lines. Even so, she did not sign unconditionally, but plainly declared that she only retracted it insofar as it was God's will. In virtue of this concession, she was not burned but conducted back to prison. So, in any case, they basically, it seems that they put her in a position where part of the retraction meant that she could not wear male clothes. So she's given a dress again, but then when she is in prison, she is only, when she's to be dressed, she's only given male clothes to wear. So she has nothing else to wear. Now, it was pointed out somewhere in here that the crime of wearing men's clothes, if you were a woman, St. Thomas Aquinas had apparently weighed in on this and had said, well, if a woman has to hide herself for some reason in male clothes, or if she has nothing else to wear, then, there's no sin in wearing men's clothes. Now, it's interesting to think now that it was a sin to wear men's clothes, but that, this was the Middle Ages. So basically the fact that she was now wearing men's clothes again, and mind you, she's in prison and has no choice about what she wears, this became a evidence that she had committed heresy again after promising not to, basically. However, she was allowed to make a confession, to receive communion, and she was still burned at the stake. She asked for a cross, which after she'd embraced it was held up before her while she called continuously on the name of Jesus. Into the last, at the record of the trial, she declared that her voices came from God and had not deceived her. At her death, her ashes were thrown into the Seine. And then after that, there's this long process with the Holy See of what they call rehabilitation. Basically, where they revisit it, they declare the trial to be invalid, they declare the whole thing to be false, a political stunt. Of course, it doesn't really help Joan at this point, as I have said. So it says, in Shakespeare's day, she was still regarded in England as a witch in league with the fiends of hell, but a juster estimate had prevailed in the pages of even Speed's History of Great Britain, the beginning of the 19th century. The sympathy for her, even in England, was general. And the writers, of course, they mention a whole list of them, greeted the Maid with a tribute of respect which was not surpassed even in her own native land. Among her Catholic fellow countrymen, she had been regarded even her lifetime as divinely inspired. Okay, so here's what we have. We have this is the basic story of Joan of Arc. All right, so where does this leave us? This is our basic story. And so now we want to turn to the questions that I have. So first of all, let's look at who is giving her these visions. Who is telling her that she needs to do this? That the voice of that God wants her to do this. Well, we have Archangel Michael. Now, Archangel Michael is he's definitely the warrior element of the archangels. Associated very much with the South, associated with Mars energy. In fact, it's Archangel Michael. Michael probably comes from Michael probably comes from a very similar Babylonian figure with a very similar name, who was considered to be the force that we now would associate with Mars or with Ares or with the god of war. Archangel Michael, it probably has his origins in this kind of figure. So of course, it makes sense that you have this kind of warrior angel telling her that she has to go to battle. But Archangel Michael is also known for something else. He's also known, he's the one, you see, any paranormal show, that Archangel Michael is called upon as the one who defends you in battle against the wickedness and snares of the devil. So Archangel Michael is the one who is the defender of the pious and the heavenly against the demonic. Okay, that's the role that he assumes and frequently is called upon as a protector. Like I said, anybody who practices any kind of esoteric ritual knows that Michael, on my right hand, Michael, right, or Michael, is the one who tends to be associated with the south facing direction, and he is this, and of course he is an archangel. Now the archangels are not the highest order of angels. The seraphim are in fact considered to be probably the highest order of angels if we're going to be talking about hierarchies. How much those hierarchies really matter, I mean, I don't know. In terms of what the politics of heaven would be, right? I mean, but he is definitely an intermediary figure, like all angels are. Angels are intermediaries. They relay divine messages. And so, so it's not surprising that an intermediary is sent. And of course, he's a rather illustrious intermediary, I might add. We think about, for example, the annunciation of when the angel appears to tell, Mary that she is pregnant with Jesus, or the angel that appears to the flocks telling, the shepherds saying, a savior is going to be born. When we hear these stories, we're often looking at usually Archangel Gabriel. When the archangels are sent, I mean, this is big guns and this is big news. Okay, this is not little stuff. So, you have this little girl who's, 12, 13 years old. I guess it started at age 12, where she starts being spoken to by the Archangel Michael. Well, that's interesting, right? Okay, so the other two who he instructs her to listen to, St. Margaret of Antioch and St. Catherine of Alexandria. Now, as I mentioned before, both of these women are martyrs. They've died in the early church. St. Margaret is one who is an extreme beauty, but devoted herself to Christianity and wanted to preserve her virginity. There was a nobleman who lusted after her and wanted to make her his concubine. When she refused, then she ended up being brought in on some kind of trumped up charges and tortured. They tried to burn her to death, but then she wouldn't burn, and they went through all these different machinations, and finally they beheaded her. So she's considered to be an early Christian martyr during the time of Diocletian, about the year 305, 303, like around that period of time. And then there's St. Catherine of Alexandria, who again is more closer to the Roman Empire period, like really early Christianity. I don't have the exact dates on her, but she is one of the ones who is a wealthy woman of influence and education who tries to influence the emperor to stop the persecution of the Christians. So, and of course, then she ends up, being martyred as well for her efforts. So we have these two women who end up as martyrs. One who is martyred because of her great beauty and her refusal to submit. Okay, and then the second one is one who is somebody who is very educated and knowledgeable and who dares to go against or tries to persuade the emperor with her opinion, with her point of view, to try to get the guy in charge to do something different. So in both cases, the two martyrs who are sent, these saintly women who are sent to speak to Catherine, and she only sees them from the waist up. Okay, and they appear to her with crowns as though they are queens of heaven, and it's very interesting because these are both martyrs who have in some way defied, questioned, or tried to persuade those in power. Basically going against whatever would have been established for women or what the expectations would have been of women. So it's interesting that these are the ones, along with the Archangel Michael. Okay, now I want to just kind of keep all this floating in your head as we're talking about this. Okay, so she has these visions. Now, she does talk about the different things that are supposedly said to her in these visions. She doesn't tell a whole lot, but she does give the details, the prophecies that are given to her about the battles and how things are going to turn out, which always turn out to be right. And she is, remember, initially examined by church scholars who don't find anything heretical in what she says. She's not saying anything that goes against church doctrine or dogma when she talks about them, but she still keeps a lot of those visions private. She suggests that they have had, and the thing is, the proof that seems to be in the veracity of the vision is that when she actually goes and does all of the things that she is asked to do, to take some troops to go lead certain battles, that she actually has all the things that she says are going to happen, all the victories that the French are going to have actually happen, and she actually does have success in repelling the English, which is what makes them pay attention to her. Now, of course, nobody in all of this thinks that Joan has any kind of power in her own right. This must be power that comes from God. She must be being carried along by Archangel Michael or a host of angels who are giving them victory in battle, right? That's got to be the assumption. And of course, the first time things don't go quite so well, they turn their back on her. They're not interested in her. They're apathetic. They don't care about her religious visions. Most of them probably think she's just crazy. And eventually, when she is finally captured, she who put Charles VII on the throne, and she who, very, very, very bravely and very brazenly stepped up and not only stepped up to go to battle, but had victory. This is something, and it's something that's forgotten in an instant as soon as things don't go their way. It's just kind of like, oh, God must have abandoned you, we're out, bye. Or they may not even think of it that way. They may just say, we never took you that seriously to begin with, and all it takes is you to fall down one time, and you're no longer in our good graces. So the story itself is, it's probably pretty much what you would expect, but it's pretty appalling. And you do have to ask the question as to, okay, if we're going to take the angels and their at face value, if we're going to take the communications from the angels, if we can say, as Saint Michael the Archangel tells her, God commanded you to do this, it does seriously beg the question as to why her and why, and why would she be set up for this? Let's put that a question. That's going to be the last question I address. My mind keeps coming back to it, but let's just put it aside for the moment. Okay, so let's look at the charge of heresy. So in this charge of heresy, she is really the only thing they can charge her with, other than trying to declare her visions fraudulent, which again, ecclesiastical authorities already already declared that they were not fraudulent, but, now politics gets involved. This becomes kind of a sham trial, where it's really just trumped up charges that are meant to give them justification for putting her to death as a witch and a heretic. Remember that the English refused, were terrified of her in other ways. They had like a supernatural terror of this, 16, 17, maybe not, I guess by the time she was in prison, she was probably 19, but this young girl who's barely an adult who's managed to flounce all their armies, and the fact that she said she was sent there by God. I mean, this is the Middle Ages. Nowadays, people might have some different feelings about it. I don't know. Maybe they had feelings about it then too. We don't know what people really thought in the Middle Ages. But certainly there was a zeitgeist there that was surrounded by, was definitely influenced by the church. In fact, if you believed something outside of what the church told you to believe, you were going to be burned at the stake. So, so this was not a kind of culture where any kind of individuality or free speech or authenticity of voice was something that you could do. I mean, that was just not something that happened. So, okay. So the charges, the main charge, other than declaring that the voices were delusions, was that she was dressed in the clothing of man, and that this was a sin. Now, it was pointed out, and I believe the Catholic Encyclopedia went on about this a little bit at length. As I mentioned earlier, Thomas Aquinas has said that, obviously, in his Summa Theologica, talks about the idea of women dressing as men, and says that, it's not really a very great sin. I mean, there's certain cases where it's not sinful at all. And in fact, Joan met both of those criteria. She had, she was hiding her identity as a woman by dressing in male clothes to become part of the army, because, this wasn't a time when women were part of the army, or certainly not a culture where women were part of the army. And also, she, when she was in prison, if those were the clothes they gave her to wear, then what is she going to do? Just be like, no, I'm going to go naked. She had to wear something. And of course, that would have been immodesty, and that would have been a whole different kind of a charge. Basically, that was the reason that she was burned at the stake and tortured, was because she wore a man's clothes. Now, what does that have to say? Now, we've talked a little bit about liminality in this podcast, and the way in which cross-dressing is regarded as something that kind of puts you in this liminal space. It puts you in a transitional space. I think this might have been a Patreon podcast that I did, but we talked about liminality, particularly as it relates to initiations, and frequently a feature of initiations can be that, for example, a girl might be dressed in the clothes of a boy, or a boy in the clothes of a girl. When we talk about Samhain and the original festival of Samhain, this border time when the veil is thin, the whole idea of dressing up for Halloween, part of it is just the idea that one goes outside of their role, dresses or acts outside their role. You can actually even go back to Bacchanals and Dionysian festivals where this sort of thing took place as well. Men dressed as women, women dressed as men. The slaves became the ones in charge. They were the ones who were allowed to rout their masters. And where you have a reversal of social categories and you have this upset in the social order. And I think it's pretty interesting that Joan, really the thing she's being burned at the stake she's being burned at the stake because she is a woman taking on the role and the attire of a man. Now, we've talked a bit about this. This is a question that I have brought up over and over again when it comes to the subject of cross-dressing, or what they call transvestites, transvesticism. Is that the right word? Which, interestingly, I remember when I was researching something on it, it was still regarded in some places as a kind of disorder. And I'm like, I don't think nowadays we would call that a disorder. It only tends to be a disorder if men dress up as women. It doesn't tend to be a disorder the other way. Although there was a period of time, I think it was only up until, women kind of had to wear skirts everywhere until like the 1970s. And then it was okay to wear trousers, or jeans or something like that. Before that, their women could be fired from their jobs from doing that and so forth. There was this real strict thing about dress, because dress imposes a certain kind of role. So it's almost like not only is she basically still a child, but she's a female. And, the women and children are not the ones who make war. The women and children are not the ones who get out there and rout their enemies, right? That's what her sin was. Her sin was acting outside of her role. She had flipped the gender construct by going out there and fighting. And this was, and it's interesting that this ends up marking her as a witch and as a heretic. So this puts Joan, again, rightly or wrongly, they're trying to put her into the realm of the dark feminine. They're putting her into the realm of this almost, I'm going to say a Lilith figure, but when I say that, I don't mean it in a sexual sense. I mean it in the sense of having equality with a man, having the same, wanting the same equality with a man, and having rebellion against what her role is or what she's expected to do. Now, mind you, Joan really isn't that much of a rebel. She is definitely has a strong allegiance to her country. She has a strong allegiance to the rightful king. The secret sign is interesting that she has, and this is the thing that convinces him that this peasant girl from Domremy is going to be able to tell him there's too much there for them to ignore in terms of what she, what her supernatural claims and the validity of them. Okay, there's too much for them to ignore. But they basically decide that they have to humiliate her and put her to death, because basically she's being shown that you as a woman, even with with God putting you there, even with God telling you that this is what you have to do, we're going to humiliate you, and we're basically going to condemn you as somebody who is outside the church. We're going to condemn you as somebody who is outside society, for daring to have the courage to stand up and put on a man's clothes. Because that's just it. The defiance of that is something that is hard for us. Again, hard for us to imagine now. We don't think of, putting on the clothes might have been one thing. But then taking troops, French troops, and actually beating the English is quite another. And if someone did not want to believe in her voices, they might believe it was an act of witchcraft. She is doing something that a woman is not supposed to be able to do. So this leads me to the last part of what I'm looking at here. And that is about why Joan. Why in the world would, whatever agency, okay, let's stick with the supernatural agency theory. There have been different theories about whether or not something that Joan had from the local chestnut trees, if she ate something that gave her these weird visions, whether or not she was schizophrenic or how these things. You hear all these things. All of these things are modern, retrospective things, and most of them I just think are bunk. I don't entertain theories that she was mentally deranged and ill, because if she was, I don't think you would be having the result that you had. Okay, to me, the proof can all the proof's in the pudding, right? I mean, it's how. She was able to pull this off very successfully, and everything she did was right. This is why she was being listened to in the first place, because they were like, first they were like, who are you? Get the hell out of here. And then it was just kind of like, okay, well, maybe I do need to listen to this, right? And the idea that these men listened to her is a testament either to her character and the strength of her character, or the strength of the evidence that she presented to them, that she had the road to victory for them. So then I start thinking about why Joan. And this may be the area where I get a little bit off track, perhaps, in terms of what there's evidence for. Because the bottom line is that's not an answerable question from an evidentiary standpoint. All we know is that what's accepted by the church is that she had visions. The visions were accepted as theologically legitimate, okay? And she had a vision of the Archangel Michael, who was the intermediary who gave her the orders to go do all the things that she did. And you have these two female saints, St. Margaret and St. Catherine, who are also very brave women who martyred themselves, or who are martyred because of their convictions and their strength. So it's almost like asking her to draw on the strength of the female saints who also were being called to this kind of a death. Now, you could say that Joan of Arc was going to a martyr's death, but she's not technically seen as going to a martyr's death. Now, here's the messed up part. Because the court that put her to death was a church court. So it's not like, the emperor's court of Nero or Diocletian or one of the Roman emperors who were persecuting Christians. You can't say that. She was being persecuted by her own religion, really by, her own church, as influenced by politics. Okay, which is probably another good reason why politics and religion should not mix. But I've thought about the question, why Joan? Why would you pick some, 12, 13-year-old peasant girl and tell her, you've got to go rout the English army? It sounds incredible even from a spiritual perspective, okay? Why would she be the one that's chosen? Now, people will say, like, when you read the different Catholic writers who will talk about her, they'll say, well, it's her piety and her strength of heart and her chastity. That's bunk, okay? I'm sorry. There are other Christian saints out there who have similar, piety and faith and heart and chastity and blah, 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 and all those things that they see worthy of sainthood. And they don't get called to go to war, okay? Especially if they're women. They don't get called to war. It also begs the question as to why, it also involves religion very heavily in the war. Says that, God somehow wants France to be free of the English. It politicizes the actual religious atmosphere. And so the question is, why would, we could look at the whole thing as a fabrication, as a kind of allegory, like this is somehow an allegory for, that has to do with the war, that has to do with, perhaps even with the idea of France, and France frequently takes a role throughout the Middle Ages in terms of being kind of the third Rome. And I don't really think that was necessarily what was happening at this time, but I have to quite remember when the quote-unquote the anti-pope was installed at Avignon. That actually might have to do more with next week's podcast. There might be a connection there from if my memory is serving me, and my memory could be serving me wrongly, so don't take me at my word on that. But I do know that there was this idea of establishing another papacy at Avignon in France. So France is known as a very, very highly Catholic country, and this could be like when you would hear tales of the Palladium falling from the sky, or the Aegis of Jupiter falling down to declare the legitimacy of Rome and Roman kings and all this kind of stuff. We don't know if this is another story that's kind of like that. But the thing is, what's different from those other stories is that we have an actual court account of what's gone on. So, and of course, this was not something that was being held up as a heroic tale or something honorable at the time. Joan was seen as somebody, this crazy woman who was spewing all of these things and perhaps engaging with the devil. So nobody was looking at this as any kind of heroism at that time, in spite of her victories. And in spite of putting Charles VII on the throne, it was all very kind of reluctant, like, the way that it was won, it's almost like, you were beaten by a girl, It was like it didn't wash too well with the cultural narrative. Okay, so why even if we want to assume it's the force of all the force of the angels was with her, making her charging her on to victory, which of course is what people would have assumed. They would have said, oh, well, clearly she was not capable of this on her own. But that's the third part of what I'm getting to. Okay, why? Okay, if there's some kind of a divine being behind this, okay, that sends one of their chief intermediary angels to this girl to tell her that she needs to defend France from the English. And she's like 13. What the question then, and of course, and then she actually does it. Okay, it's not just some if nothing ever came of it, then we would be talking about her as somebody who was delusional, not somebody who potentially had an authentic vision. But then I have to say, who is Joan? Who is Joan? What is it about her that, out of all the people that could rout the English, where God would go, yeah, this 12-year-old peasant girl, yeah, she's good. She's the one. Let's have her do it. But and then in the process of her having this military victory, then everything else, yes, she had her moment, but everything else that she went through was just horrific. Now, again, I was talking about the life of the martyr, and people may say, oh, well, that's something that like guarantees you a place in heaven, and you have that kind of rhetoric as well. But as I said, she wasn't a martyr. She wasn't a martyr. She died as a heretic, not as a martyr. In her own church. So, how, and how her life must have ended, how she must have felt at the end of her life, after all that she did, all she sacrificed, to have that happen to her. Even though she was very strong and she had full conviction of everything that she was saying, and they're just going out of their way to just break her. I have to say, what was the, if there's a supernatural reason for it, why? Is there some kind of a subtext here about a kind of patriarchal religious structure that raises a woman up only to just kind of have her kind of drop her down and kick the shit out of her? I don't know. There's just something that feels very weird about it. It almost suggests to me that Joan herself, in some spiritual way, was somebody very special. And I just don't know. I just don't buy the idea of tests. Clearly she was tested, but it almost feels like, that's a really grand scale test when Archangel Michael comes along and is along for the ride and part of this whole thing. I don't know. It just makes me feel like there's probably something more special about Joan of Arc, because I don't attribute all of her success to, God commanded it and therefore all the angels had her back. Well, maybe they did, but she had to have something of her own. She wasn't just a kind of puppet, or a marionette being operated by some force, right? There had to be something extra special about her. And that's the thing that I always wonder about. What is it about Joan of Arc that put her up to this task? And especially for a political victory that, in terms of what it is she was trying to achieve for France, in a way ended up being short-lived when Charles VII just goes ahead and signs a treaty with the Duke of Burgundy, and, effectively, this attempt to repulse the English, it fails. It initially it succeeds, and then it's kind of a failure, because they end up kind of acceding to England anyway. So it's just it's like, yeah, you have to ask what the whole point of that was. Now, one way you could look at it is that there is no point, right? Is there any point? There's always the old rhetoric of, God works in mysterious ways. Well, to make people suffer immeasurably for almost nothing, to torment and to follow this girl to the point that they're telling her, no, you must go and you must be the one to fight. That's still the perennial question. What is it about Joan that makes her the one that had to fight? There were lots of other people around who probably would have been just as suitable, who could have done the job. Why Joan of Arc? And I don't buy the whole, oh, well, she had to be somebody pure. I am sure that there were men there who equally had, who were pious and devout, who could have also made great soldiers. Okay, you pick a 12-year-old. Well, at that time she was 16, I guess. You pick a 16-year-old girl. So what is the power of this 16-year-old girl? And that is something I think that gets lost in a lot of this. She's ignored, bypassed. There's apathy of the court that she helps get into power. There's the hatred and indifference of the people in the army and the way that they treat her. And then when she's captured, there's the total indifference by those whom she, vindicated and raised up. They're just like, she's not important enough now for us. It's like putting her in a position where she's obviously the capable one, but it's like she's like the ultimate sufferer of Chiron and Aries. If you follow astrology, it's like no matter what she does, it isn't good enough. It's kind of, I don't know, maybe that's why it bothers me. It's like there's just something about it where you just feel like, how much more would she have to do to prove to people her worthiness. But of course, and again, eventually she's only vindicated after she's suffered a horrific and torturous death and humiliation. So I don't know, that the whole thing just kind of, it sits with me in a very, very weird way. There's a certain way that the story is romanticized to some degree in retrospect. Certainly when I went to Catholic school, it's just kind of like she just charged through and she was totally confident of everything the whole time. And, almost like, she was, surrounded by this kind of, it's like, no, I'm sure it wasn't like that at all. I'm sure it was not like that for her at all. And she is a real person. She's not a folk tale. She's not a mythical figure. She's not a deity. She was a real person who actually did this, and it's on record. And that this was the pretext for doing it, and she pulled it off. So I think we just need to not forget that Joan of Arc pulled it off. And if we're talking about heavenly intervention, what is it about her that's so special that Archangel Michael has to come down and tell her that this is something that she has to do? Yeah, I don't know. That's just, you can make of that what you will, but I don't know. There just seems to me, there's probably more I just feel like, just subjectively, like there's more to Joan of Arc than meets the eye there. There has to be something else special about her that gets kind of missed, because literally she's just kind of like this, that you can't, somebody like that, any of us, okay, any of us who are very strong people, right, who are very determined and determined to, say, flout social convention or do things our own way. I mean, how many people would do something like that and actually be able to succeed at it? In spite of the absolutely gargantuan obstacles that she faced. I don't know. It's just, and if we believe that she had the heavenly visitors that she had, and what these visitors seem to represent, and the kind of powers that they seem to reflect or represent, if you want to look at them archetypally, if that is some kind of projected archetype of what's driving her, it's pretty powerful one. Yeah, I don't know. It's just really interesting, and like I said at the beginning, I found her story to be very, very upsetting in a lot of ways, inexplicably to me, because I read lots of things that are probably, more upsetting, but I don't know why. And I just kind of feel like her, that the whole thing, the great mystery still comes down to why Joan, and I don't know that the sanctity of her character is really enough of a convincing reason for me. And even the whole, well, God works in mysterious ways thing is also not terribly convincing to me. I think I want to end with maybe just one final thought on that, and then I'm going to stop talking about this. But I think, okay, I mentioned sort of this Lilith characterization as the rebellious female, right? The female who is equal to a man and who wants to be equal to a man, does not want to take on a certain role, and is rebellious, okay? And again, I'm not saying that by trying to say that Joan of Arc is a Lilith figure, but she has that kind of archetypal characteristic. The other thing I'm reminded of is something I wrote a paper on some years back, I want to say maybe it was 2009, about Jung's book Answer to Job, in which he talks about the church, but really at that time Israel, if we're talking Old Testament in the book of Job, as being the bride of Yahweh. There's a covenant with Yahweh, right? There's the bride of Yahweh. And Jung characterizes this relationship in Answer to Job as an abusive marriage. It's where you are the servant, you are the suffering servant. You are the servant of this God, who in Answer to Job, when you ask any questions about your treatment, are told, "Who the hell are you?" And this may just be another version of that story. You know, if she's acting as the bride of the beloved, the beloved's not really treating her like a beloved. Beloved, this is more the old school abusive beloved who says, you will simply do as I say. And if you want to fulfill my covenant, you're going to be, abused and thrown around. So I don't know. I have some maybe because I just saw the new Nosferatu movie recently, and I'm going to be doing a review of that on the Chthonia live stream next Monday, where I'll probably talk about this theme. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That well could be the answer right there. But as a historical event, this still, leaves me scratching my head a little bit about Joan and okay, understanding that there's clearly some kind of a metaphor here. We're not just talking about a metaphorical story. And so the question then still, the question I started with is still probably the one that I don't think we are ever going to fully answer, which is why Joan? So anyway, I hope that this, exploration, thought, reflection, if you have ideas, definitely throw them down in the comments. Love to hear what other people think. But if you found this interesting, consider subscribing if you're not subscribed already. I have the podcast is on Spreaker, but you can also subscribe on your favorite podcast app if you're not subscribed. If you're on YouTube, obviously subscribe and hit the notification bell there if you're not subscribed already. And if you want to support this work, please check out patreon.com/Chthonia. I do try to do special podcasts every other week when I'm not doing the regular one. And there's some other benefits and bonuses when you sign up that you can check out there. Follow me on social media, Chthonia Podcast, one word, on Instagram. Facebook, it comes up as 2 words. And on YouTube, it's technically just Chthonia, although if you do youtube.com/@Chthonia Podcast, one word, you will find my channel. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.